Okay, I think we are recording. So, welcome everybody to the FastingWell Podcast. And I have a guest for you today, Emma Van Carlen. And I'll let her tell you a little about herself in a moment. But from what I understand, she's a health coach and she's got a book coming out soon called Fast Yourself Fit, using fasting and low carb eating to lose weight and feel great. So that sounds pretty cool. So we're going to be focusing on those kind of topics today about fasting, low carb for weight loss, and for feeling great, because that's part of the title too. And I have I think some useful questions lined up, so I think it'll be interesting. Now, Emma, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about how you got to this point where you are using coaching and or writing a book about fasting and low carb for weight loss and other health benefits.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I started fasting probably about 15 years ago, but I really got into it in the last several years. I Historically, for me, I've kind of been struggling with my weight my whole adult life, pretty much on and off, been on several different diets and never really found anything that stuck or anything that worked for me. When I first started reading up about fasting, I was really intrigued about the health benefits, of course, and also the weight loss benefits. I The main trigger for me to start fasting properly was that I got engaged in 2017, and that was a big catalyst for me to take care of my weight. I was at that point at the heaviest weight I'd been. I was not happy with how I was looking, but more so how I was feeling. I had a lot of, I would say, hormonal issues. I felt bloated a lot. I had developed adult onset cystic acne, which was a huge problem for me. I was on medication. I was on long-term antibiotics for that. I was being evaluated to go on Accutane, which is a really strong medication to treat acne. And just before I was about to be put on Accutane, I got engaged, and that sort of triggered me to look into fasting even more. I'd done research before. I had done fasting before, but only intermittently, as in maybe once a year I would do a little bit of fasting. I never did it consistently. But once I did that and started to do the research and actually got into it, started to do fasting consistently and started to doing longer fasts, and also cleaning up my diet with low carb eating, I was able to lose weight pretty effortlessly, which felt so strange to me. Somebody who's tried so many different diets, all of a sudden it felt easy. And then, more than that, my bloating reduced, but also my cystic acne healed. I was able to go off my medication. I was able to go off the long-term antibiotics, and I also didn't have to go on Accutane. It healed all on its own. And I just felt so much more energetic, and I felt so much better in my body. Of course, when I was losing the weight, I felt healthier. I didn't feel so sluggish anymore. And I was able to run further, faster, just walk better and not feel winded. It was an incredible experience to finally feel like I was connecting with my body and that I was healing my body from the inside. So that's my journey with fasting. I certainly had a bunch of hiccups along the way. I was learning as I was going, but I was using fasting research. I was reading up on books and lots of resources, and really taking that together with my own experience to then achieve my goal weight. And once I had done that, I just knew I wanted to share this with other people that are in my same situation, that might have tried so many different things to lose weight and feel better, but nothing really worked. And so that's why I got into coaching. I started coaching just really small scale. One person asked me, "Hey, Emma, I'm also getting married. What can I do? Can you teach me what you did?" And that's how I started doing it. And, now I've coached hundreds of people and to successfully lose weight, whether it's for a wedding or for another reason, or just to feel better in general. And it's been amazing to see how successful my clients have been, and just to see their lives turn around and for them to be healthier, I think physically, but mentally as well. A lot of people struggle with food issues that go beyond just the weight. It's a huge mental struggle for a lot of people. A lot of people struggle with binge eating. I know I did as well, several times. And fasting has really helped to not only combat my physical, it helped me lose 30 to 40 pounds, but also it has helped me feel so much more stable mentally. I've completely, like I said, healed my cystic acne. That's the physical as well. But mentally, it's healed my binge eating behaviors. And I find the same for my clients as well. People that use fasting properly and use it as a tool to change their relationship to food can reap so many benefits that go beyond just the weight loss.
Wow. Yeah. So sounds like you had a lot of benefits personally and then started to share it with others. And that kind of led to more coaching and eventually writing the book. So very cool. Really cool story. So a quick personal note. So thanks for joining us in the evening in your time zone. I guess you said you're in Liverpool, England. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Yes. Now, are you native to there? Because I'm no expert on accents at all. I'm the complete opposite of that, but I don't sense much of like a British accent, what I would think of as a British accent.
No, so I'm from Sweden, but I haven't lived in Sweden for 15 years. I've lived in the UK for the majority of that time, and I also lived out in the US for a couple of years.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because we hadn't delved into all of that. So interesting. All right, so kind of back to the fasting topic. So you told us about your journey and kind of how you got into coaching and writing the book and stuff like that. So of course, the landscape is shifting, and there's now versus a decade ago, there's a lot more openness to talking about things like low carb and fasting. A fewer rejection, fewer kind of concerns, etc. But there still are plenty. And so when you talk about using fasting and or low carb for weight loss or health improvement, what are some common objections that you hear, and how do you kind of address those?
Yeah, so probably the most common one I hear and deal with is the whole starvation mode thing. A lot of people think that fasting will put your body in this so-called starvation mode. It's a really popular thing to talk about. And so I'd really like to address that whenever people come to me with that concern, because it is a valid concern. People say that, well, when you restrict your calories severely, doesn't your body shut down the metabolism and just like store all the body fat? And to an extent, you're right when you say that, because when you reduce your calories really low, the body does respond by reducing your metabolic rate in order to preserve your energy levels. But fasting and caloric restriction are two very different processes. And so it creates two very different reactions in your body. So when you're on a low calorie diet, which is the most common diet out there. So you eat really small portions, or you only eat salads, or, so you severely restrict the amount of calories that you eat, but you still eat consistently throughout the day. Your body does reduce its metabolic rate in response to that. With fasting, however, you don't eat anything at all. And so that creates a completely different response in your body, because the hormones react differently to that. So when you're fasting, you don't eat anything at all for a set period of time. But when you do eat, you eat appropriately, and you eat a balanced meal until you're full, until you're satisfied. And that's what makes it so different to caloric restriction. What happens then when you're fasting, as opposed to eating a low calorie diet, is that fasting forces your body into a process called ketosis. And that's when your body starts to break down your stored body fat for energy rather than the food that's coming into your body, because you don't have any food that's coming in. With low calorie diets, you still have food coming in. And so your body is using the energy from that food and then conserving the rest of the energy, because the food that's coming in is so sparse and so scarce. With fasting, there's no food at all coming in. And so your body has to shift to a completely different system. It doesn't burn glucose from food anymore. It has to switch to ketosis, where it burns your stored body fat for energy. Now, it's really interesting because research has shown that a low calorie diet does reduce your metabolic rate, but that fasting actually increases your metabolic rate. One study found that fasting for just 48 hours increased your metabolic rate by 14%, which is really interesting. Fasting does so many more interesting things in terms of hormones as well. It reduces your insulin, which is the key driver behind fat loss. When insulin levels are low, we lose fat. And when insulin levels are high, we gain fat. Fasting reduces your insulin levels, and eating increases your insulin levels. So what you want to do to lose body fat is to stay in a state of low insulin for as long as possible. Fasting also increases your human growth hormone, which is such an interesting topic as well when we talk about metabolism, because human growth hormone increases your metabolic rate, and it also helps preserve your muscle mass while allowing you to burn fat. Another study found that fasting for just 48 hours increased human growth hormone by up to 500%, which is such an amazing statistic, and really shows that fasting has a very different effect on your metabolism than low-calorie eating.
Okay, very nice. That was a nice way of explaining kind of the fasting, feasting cycles versus consistent calorie restriction, and kind of how if you do the same thing all the time, your body has to adapt to it with the low calories or whatever, as well as if you're fasting all the way, then you kind of take the brakes off of fat burning by lowering the insulin and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for walking us through that. Are there any other really common objections that you hear besides the starvation mode and the other related things that you were talking about?
I think the other thing that some people worry about that is that it might be unsustainable, or that you might just regain the weight afterwards, after you've finished fasting. And that's another fair concern. And I think it is slightly related to the metabolic rate decrease as well that you get from low calorie eating, that most people are used to dieting that way. And when you are on a low calorie diet, a lot of people will have experienced this. You lose weight, absolutely. But once you then start eating normally again, you gain the weight back, because your body has adjusted by reducing the metabolic rate. So with fasting, we know it's different. It doesn't do the same thing to your metabolic rate. It actually can boost your metabolic rate, right? But with fasting as well, when you start eating again, your body has gotten used to another way of burning fat. So as long as you, of course, change your habits, if you go back to eating a really unhealthy diet, then of course your body is going to start gaining weight back again. I mean, fasting is not a magic pill, but as long as you change your eating habits, you change to a healthier way of eating and living, there's nothing that would force you to gain weight back automatically after a fast, or in any increased way than losing weight from a calorie deficit. And in fact, it's the opposite. Losing weight from a calorie deficit will make you gain weight in the long run, most often, but losing weight from fasting won't.
Yeah, it's a good point about many people have done the yo-yo dieting, which is often related to, like you said, calorie restriction, kind of the most common way of dieting. Obviously, that's what we were all kind of told growing up, is like, just cut your calories, eat less, move more, things like that. And that kind of leads to yo-yo dieting, because the metabolism slows down if you're cutting your calories day after day and stuff like that. And then obviously, like anything, like if you get in good shape with fasting, low carb, exercise, whatever, if you go back to eating a bunch of junk food, obviously you're going to reverse some of those effects. So a lot of it comes down to like changing your habits and stuff. And I guess we'll have to get into that a little bit later in the conversation. But so those are some of the common objections. But then assuming somebody is on board with the idea of trying fasting and low carb to lose weight and improve their health, what are kind of the very, very first steps that you have people take to kind of get into it? I assume you don't have them go on a fast for a week straight from day one. But what are the first couple of steps that you have people do, and how do you kind of help them ease into it or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I get a bunch of people that come to me that are complete beginners. They have never done fasting. They've never done low carb eating or ketogenic eating. And so the first step that I like to do with people is just get them to have a feel of fasting. And so we start usually with what's called a 16-8 schedule. That means that you fast for 16 hours out of the day and you eat for 8 hours out of the day. The easiest way to think about that is, usually you skip breakfast, right? And you eat just lunch and dinner. That's the easiest way to think about it. So you will have your first meal at 12 noon, that's your lunch, and then you'll have your dinner by no later than 8 p.m. So that means you will have had your meals within an 8-hour eating window, let's say, and then you have a 16-hour fasting window. So that's what I usually like to start people off with to get a feel for what fasting feels like. And at the same time, I switch people to a ketogenic diet, because it's so important to note that fasting can be really easy or it can be really difficult. And a lot of it depends on how you're eating. If you eat a high carb diet with fasting, which you absolutely can do, but you're making it unnecessarily difficult for yourself. If you switch to a ketogenic diet, you make it so much easier, because a ketogenic diet sort of mimics what fasting does. We already know that fasting keeps your insulin levels low. A ketogenic diet does the same thing. Because a ketogenic diet has so few carbs, you basically cut out bread, pasta, rice, sugar, fruit, anything that is high in carbs, high in sugar, you cut that completely out. And what that does is that it keeps your insulin levels low as well. So fasting together with a ketogenic diet, you get to keep your insulin levels low constantly. You keep your insulin levels pretty much at zero during your fast. And then when you're eating, you keep your insulin levels very low still, because you're not eating carbs. You're not eating a high carb diet that will spike those insulin levels high. So those are the first two things that I like to start people off with. And then as they get used to fasting, as they get used to ketosis, it'll usually come quite natural for clients to ask to go further, to maybe try an OMAD schedule, which means one meal a day. So you'd eat maybe dinner only every day for a week. People tend to slip into that pretty easily once they've gotten used to a ketogenic diet, because what a ketogenic diet does is that it helps you to feel less hungry. Because your insulin levels are not constantly spiked, it also means that your hunger spikes. They don't keep popping up like they normally do with a high carb diet. So what ends up happening is that fasting gets to be so much easier. You can fast for much longer without feeling those dreaded hunger pangs.
Okay, great. Yeah, I like the idea of easing into it with some time restricted eating, like 16/8 or something like that. Because yeah, you'll get some reps in, kind of let your mind and body start adapting a bit and stuff like that, and so forth. Now, when people do that, and let's say they're doing the low carb at the same time, or keto, whatever terminology we want to use, depending on how low the carbohydrates are and all that. When people are doing that, what have you found to be then after starting the most common kind of challenges that they start dealing with, or complaints that they have, or any issues that they run into, and then how do you work through that with them?
Yeah, so the first thing that will shock most people when they start a fasting regime or when they start eating a ketogenic diet is what we call keto flu. And it really is what it sounds like. You will start to feel a bit fluey. You might, in the first few days, if you're not used to fasting, if you're not used to eating a ketogenic diet, the first few days, I'd say maybe 3-4 days, you might feel a little bit weak. You might feel a little bit headachy, a little bit shaky in your body, and that's really just carb withdrawal. But it's so common, and it happens for most people that start a new fasting routine or start a ketogenic diet from a standard American or standard Western diet. That is because your body is just not used to using this system of ketosis. We're just used to living in fat storage mode, in constant eating mode all the time, and so we're just using our we're not using our fat burning mode in ketosis. We're just eating and eating and eating. And when we're not giving our bodies that break, it also means that we're not used to using the system. And so starting up the whole system of ketosis can take a little bit of getting used to for your body. And so in that getting used to, your body is reacting in a way before it gets used to it that can make you feel a little bit headachy, a little bit shaky, a little bit fluey. It's nothing to worry about. It's really common, and it does tend to pass within the first 3 or 4 days. And then after that, you'll feel perfectly fine. You'll be energetic. You'll feel a lot less hungry, and it'll be much easier for you to get through the fast. But you have to push through those first few days. It definitely will be worth it. On top of that, I mean, that's the physical side of it. On top of that, we have the side effects of maybe missing food, because a lot of people, we structure our days around food, really. We have, a lot of people have like breakfast, lunch, dinner. You might even have snacks. You might have mid-morning coffee or an afternoon coffee with, I don't know, cake or a sandwich or whatever else you're having, like a protein bar. People eat constantly and snack constantly. That's just how we've developed as a society. So all of a sudden not doing that leaves this void. And it's sometimes hard to get used to that not being filled by food. So that's another common struggle that I deal with my clients. It's like, what do? I don't know what to fill my time with. It's boredom more than hunger, I think, that people deal with, and cravings. There's this social reliance on food or emotional reliance on food. And so fasting really brings that to the forefront, and it gives you an opportunity to deal with that and to really think about, well, what gives me joy? What gives me calm that isn't food? And that's definitely something that the longer you go on a fasting journey, the more you'll find other ways, other outlets to feel good and to feel calm when you don't use food in that way.
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on there with everything you just explained. But yeah, when people have been eating all the time, and then, or if you're used to eating all the time, kind of with snacks and meals and so forth, and then you stop, then I know exactly what you mean about kind of, it's like a type of boredom, and then a type of reliance on food for kind of entertainment in a way, but pleasure, of course, and things like that, and all the different, or just our whole relationship with food. And so I do want to ask more about that, but real quick, going back to the keto flu thing, I think one of the solutions to that, it's not the whole thing, because your mind and your body still need to adapt in various ways, but one of the solutions to that is working on electrolytes, especially sodium. And I have some other videos and podcasts where I talk about that. So getting a lot more salt helps, because then you're going to be losing more sodium in your urine and stuff like that when you first start low carb and keto. So just to kind of mention that at least briefly, and then if people want to get into the nitty gritty of that, like I said, I have several other videos and even some podcast episodes that go over that. But in terms of the mental aspect, like you were talking about, the relationship with food and all that stuff, maybe this is a good time to bring up that topic, basically. But I was going to ask about the elephant in the room, no pun intended, which is food addiction and emotional eating or stress eating. And I had a guest on who talked all about food addiction, sugar addiction, Dr. Jen Unwin, back in episode 44, so people can go back and listen to that if they want to. She wrote a book about it. But obviously, I've experienced this, and I'm sure many listeners have, where if you have a binge eating problem, then sometimes you make some progress, but then you start to have setbacks each time that you binge again. Setbacks with weight loss, setbacks with your confidence around your whole plan and things like that, because if you kind of keep fallen off the wagon, so to speak. Binge eating disorder is the most common eating disorder, and so there's many, many people that have this. And I know sometimes it's the nighttime binging, or when people are stressed or anxious, or other times where they're kind of doing it in secret or whatever. So I'm sure that this comes up a lot if you're coaching people. Things of this nature come up a lot. So what's your approach, your way of dealing with that type of issue with sugar addiction or just that relationship with food that you were talking about a moment ago?
Yeah, so it's something that I've personally struggled with, definitely. So that's a very personal issue for me. I've struggled with binge eating my whole adult life, basically. And many of my clients struggle with the same. I think it's a big reason behind why a lot of people struggle with their weight is because they have an emotional sort of problem with food. There's a disconnect there, that we use food in a way that food wasn't intended to. A lot of people have food addiction or sugar addiction, or just like an emotional addiction to food in various ways. And so for me, I've certainly had many setbacks on my journey. It's certainly not been straightforward at all. In fact, I lost 30 pounds before my wedding, and then I got married. And then from the day after the wedding, I was on a straight path to regaining all that weight again. And within a few weeks, I'd regained all of it. And that was so devastating. But it really highlighted to me that I had more than, fixing the physical, which I lost all the weight, but I hadn't fixed the mental side of it, the emotional side of it. And so with my clients, that's something I deal with so much, because fixing the physical is just one part of it. Fixing the mental and emotional side to weight loss is what's going to make you successful in the long run. So, yeah, my approach to that is really, first of all, you have to give yourself grace. What I say to my clients all the time is focus on loving yourself through this journey, because you can't hate yourself into a version of yourself that you're going to love. It just doesn't work that way. You have to love yourself no matter where you are, no matter what you look like on that journey. You have to love yourself through it, because I spent so much time hating myself, and it really didn't get me anywhere, because hating myself or hating yourself in this journey is only going to lead you to feeling stressed, and feeling stressed is one of those big emotions that we eat on. When you have a problem relationship with food, when you are an emotional eater, stress is one of those really big things that you turn to food for. And so when you are projecting a lot of negativity onto yourself, you are creating anxiety, you're creating stress, and that's only making it more difficult for you to stick to healthy eating, to stick to fasting, and to treat yourself with respect and love. So I always say lead with love, even when it's difficult, even when it feels like you have nothing to love about yourself. I know a lot of my clients say that, I don't know, I don't love myself. I say, pick one thing that you love about yourself. And I usually challenge them. I ask them to pick one thing about themselves that they like. It can be an aspect of their personality, how they are, who they are. But then I also ask them to pick one thing that they love about their bodies. And that's a real challenge, because a lot of people come to me and they are really unhappy with their whole bodies. But I say, it can be anything. It can be, your eyelashes. It can be your wrist or your pinky finger, whatever it is. Pick one thing and just love yourself for that. Something that you actually really love. And then practice that self-love actively every day. And eventually you might pick another thing that you love about yourself. And as you move along, you'll learn to love yourself no matter where you are in your journey. And that's going to make the journey so much easier.
Okay, so sounds like that's a big early step, is just kind of shifting the mindset from kind of hating your body and wanting to get rid of all this shameful fat and stuff like that to finding positive things about yourself and focusing on that and building more of the positive, is if I'm hearing that correctly. So
yeah, definitely. And then on top of that, the other side is what I deal with my clients is sort of mindful eating. A lot of people struggle with binge eating, like we said, or food addiction, sugar addiction, in various different ways. And so people feel like they've lost control with their eating habits. And so I teach a lot of mindful eating techniques when I coach my clients, as a way to give them helpful tools to have a different relationship to food. And so it can be as simple as like reducing distractions when you're eating. Don't eat in front of the TV. Don't scroll on your phone as you're eating. Be present with the food. Make sure you taste everything carefully. Make sure you chew everything carefully. And think about, what are the sensations when you're eating? Is the food hot? Is it spicy? Is it crunchy? Is it soft, creamy? What is it? What are you experiencing? And really allow yourself to experience the meal, and check in with yourself as well. I think a lot of the times when we are mindlessly munching or eating in front of the TV, we don't really check in with ourselves. We just keep eating and eating and eating, and we're not really listening to our fullness cues and our hunger cues in a way that we need to. And so I always recommend that you check in with yourself frequently and ask yourself, am I still hungry? A lot of people eat to this point of absolute fullness, until you're absolutely stuffed. And that's a point where you should actually not get to. That's not a healthy point to get to when you're eating. You should always eat until you're satisfied. And satisfied is actually quite a neutral feeling in your body. It's not this stuffed, this feeling of I couldn't fit a single morsel into my stomach. That's too much, I think. You should try to just feel satisfied and feel calm. And so to check in with yourself, am I actually still hungry, or am I okay to finish this meal right now? Do I feel satisfied? And so some of those exercises will take some time to get used to, but the more you practice them, the more calm you'll feel around food, and the more in control you'll feel around food, and relaxed, and happy. Again, lead with love. Love the food that you're eating, and be really mindful about what you're doing to your body and what your food is doing to your body.
Yeah, I like the idea of mindful eating. I've tried to focus on that at times and found it really useful sometimes, where it's really being present and paying attention to the experience of eating. So you enjoy the food more, first of all. And then as you're doing it, you kind of notice a little bit more how full you're getting or not getting, and kind of you can really kind of sense those things a little bit more. And as you practice it a little bit more, you also start to kind of anticipate that, oh, if I go further, then I'm going to feel sick, or I'm not going to be able to fall asleep tonight, or whatever. You start to anticipate some of those effects, which are also kind of the mindfulness of like, there's this fork in the road. I can go this direction or this direction, and I value getting a good night's rest more than I value, another bowl of ice cream, or I mean, which is obviously not what you're eating if you're doing the low carb fasting thing, but in a different context or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the mindfulness is really worth working on. Now, I think it may not be strong enough, quote unquote, for someone who has a really severe sugar addiction to just be like, oh, I'm going to be mindful. They probably need to hit it from various angles and have an accountability partner and kind of go through all these different steps. But I think that is a helpful step, certainly for some people that just have a mildly dysregulated eating pattern, where they can start to really pay attention and get a better handle on it, for sure. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. And I think it's really key what you mentioned there. It's not one of these things are going to work on their own. Switching to a ketogenic diet, starting fasting, eating mindfully. Like none of these things are going to necessarily work on their own, and they're not necessarily going to work straight away. But yes, start intermittent fasting, start eating a ketogenic diet, eat healthier foods, and start eating mindfully. But also, like you said, maybe join an accountability group, or get a coach, or go to therapy, or there's so many different things, and all of it works in tandem. It's really a holistic journey. It's not one thing that's going to fix everything. It's really about focusing on what are all the different aspects that I need to become the healthiest and happiest version of myself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's when it comes to addiction, it's not just one simple change. There's usually going to be more going on. And when it comes to a whole complicated relationship with food, that may be the case as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing those ideas. Now, I know mindset is often overlooked, and we've talked a lot about it here in the last few minutes, but is there any other really important, really key mindset tips that you would have when you're starting to use fasting or low carb for weight loss and for improving your health?
So for me, it's about being really clear about your whys. So your whys is your lists of why you're doing this. It's so important to be very clear and very specific about your own list of whys. Maybe weight loss is one of them, but I'm sure there's so many more. So I always encourage my clients to be very specific and write a long list of all the whys: short-term whys, long-term whys, big whys, small whys. It can be weight loss, but it can also be, I want to be able to be healthy and live a long life for my children, or I want to be not winded when I run up a set of stairs, or I want to fit into this nice dress that I'm going to wear for my 20-year reunion. It can be anything, and it can be big, small. It can seem insignificant or significant, but it's important to write down all of your individual whys for why you're on this journey, because there will be moments of weakness when you're fasting, or when you're changing your diet in a way that maybe you haven't been used to. Maybe you've been used to eating an unhealthy diet. So it's not going to be easy all the time, but having a real clear idea of why you're doing this is really going to help in those moments. And I recommend writing a list of all of your whys and then keeping that on hand, so that when you are feeling like it is extra difficult that day, read those whys to yourself and remind yourself of why you're on this journey in the first place. That can really help to get yourself out of a stressed mindset of like, oh my gosh, I'm just too hungry right now, so I'm just going to eat something, and to really center yourself and ground yourself back to like, wait, why am I doing this? What are my aims? What are my goals? And is eating right now, or eating this unhealthy thing that I'm thinking about eating, is that going to bring me closer to my goals and my whys, or is it going to bring me further away? The other thing with mindset that I love to run by my clients is to make another list, but this is your list of excuses. So when you're fasting, and especially when you're on a long fast, like I've been, and many of my clients have been as well, is you will start to run some mind games on yourself. The hardest thing of a fast, honestly, is not your physical. It's not the hunger. A lot of people think like, oh my gosh, the most difficult thing about a fast is how hungry I'll be. Actually, it's not, because you won't actually be that hungry. I mean, hunger comes and goes, don't get me wrong, but it does pass. Hunger comes and goes in waves. As long as you ride the wave, it tends to die down. It doesn't just get worse and worse forever. So hunger is actually going to be one of your smallest problems on a fast. Your big problem is going to be your excuses, your mind games. You're going to start telling yourself all kinds of things, all kinds of reasons to break your fast early, or to try a different schedule, or to just go back to calorie restriction, or any other thing. You're going to be telling yourself so many excuses. And in those weak moments, it'll be so easy to give in to those, because we can be very convincing when we want to be. And so that's why having that list of excuses is another great tool. So write down anything you can think of that you would tell yourself on a fast, or when you're on a ketogenic diet, anything that you would tell yourself, like, oh, well, it's just too difficult, or I'm too hungry, or this is not going to work, or maybe fasting doesn't work for me, or maybe I just can't lose weight. Whatever it is, excuses that you're telling yourself, make a list of all of them, small excuses, big excuses, anything. And then in those weak moments, read that list of excuses. And then you'll be able to identify like, oh my gosh, wait, I just said this thing to myself, but it's on this list of excuses, which means I can safely disregard it and know that I'm just playing some mind games on myself. It's part of the toolkit of being able to push through those hard times on a fast.
Yeah, it sounds like really good advice to kind of figure out what your vision is. Maybe make a vision board and put it on your wall or whatever.
Absolutely.
But also to anticipate ways that you might rationalize, or like you say, make excuses. And so if you kind of anticipate and preempt those in a way, then maybe you're less likely to get thrown off when you make your typical kind of rationalization of whatever it may be, of like, oh, just a little bit's fine, or just this once, or it's a quote unquote special occasion, which was kind of my next question, because there are special occasions throughout the year, but sometimes they're twice a week for some people because of family events and things like that. And so it can be like a really, really big issue if that's coming up all the time. Now, if it's twice a year, okay, maybe it's not the end of the world. It depends on your health status. It depends on, if you can kind of tolerate, having sugary things from time to time, depending on your carbohydrate tolerance, depending on a lot of different factors. But if it's twice a week, then it's a more serious issue. But in general, how do you help your clients work through that kind of challenge, or how do you advise them to approach special occasions? Because, it could be like, oh, just eat it and fast it off later, but that's not always great. Or some sort of moderate approach, or some sort of replacement. I don't know. So how do you approach that kind of thing?
Yeah, so that's another big challenge, right? When you're on, if you say you have 50 pounds to lose, 100 pounds to lose, or 200 pounds to lose, whatever you have to lose, it's not going to be lost overnight, right? It's generally going to be a long process of at least several months. And so there's going to be times where there's going to be these quote unquote special occasions. And I think the key there is to identify what is a special occasion and what is not an actual special occasion. I think that's the first thing, to identify what's special to you and why is it special. Second of all, I think a lot of the times we might put that label of special occasion on pretty much anything. Like you said, it might be twice a week that, oh, well, eating lunch with my coworkers is a special occasion, or, having my chocolate bar on a Friday night is a special occasion. I mean, it might be for you. I mean, it's up to each individual to identify what's special, what's not special. I also think there's something to be said about it's okay to maybe pause some of those special occasions for the time being until you get your health in check and until you get your weight in check. Again, it's individual, but I mean, the way I like to approach it is that a special occasion, if it's, let's say it's your wedding, or it's like a major birthday. I mean, make some allowances for yourself if you want to. I mean, I'm usually quite flexible with my clients if there's some actual special occasion. But that being said, having a special occasion and experiencing a special occasion doesn't necessarily mean eating high carb foods. A lot of the times we equate those two things, like, oh, we have to eat a birthday cake, or we have to eat high carb, high sugar stuff on a celebration or a special event. But we actually don't have to. So I think part of it is reframing. What is it that we enjoy about a special occasion? Well, it's spending time together with our loved ones, our friends and family. It's about celebrating together. And so there are so many ways to do that doesn't involve hurting yourself with unhealthy food. Because a lot of the times, the people that come to me, and myself included, I was hurting myself with my food addict behaviors, with the way I was eating, that, and so I try to remind my clients that, celebrating with food, as in food is not necessarily celebration for you right now. Spending time with your friends and family is the real celebration. So, focus on that and focus on celebrating yourself getting healthier. And that means maybe fasting through an event, or maybe eating keto through an event. There's usually quite a lot of ways to eat keto at any given event. You don't have to eat the high carb stuff. There's usually a meat option, then you can eat the meat, just skip the potatoes or skip the bread. There's usually ways around it. For myself as well, like my personal experiences of special events, we had a promotion dinner with my husband. This was before the wedding. It was actually quite close to the wedding, probably maybe a month out or so. He got a promotion, and we had booked in advance to eat out at a Michelin star restaurant. And I just happened to be on a 7-day fast right as that was happening. And so I decided to, honor my own goals. And I went with him, of course. We celebrated. We had an amazing night. I drank my peppermint tea, and he had an amazing, 10-course sample menu, and that looked amazing, and he enjoyed it. But we focused on spending that time together and celebrating together. And for me, it didn't have to involve food at that time. I also fasted through my wedding rehearsal dinner. So that was obviously right the night before the wedding. I didn't want to risk, getting into that mindset of like, I made it, so now I'm going to just eat carbs. So, I wanted to be really mindful. I felt like I was in a really good place. And so I drank peppermint tea, and everybody else, were enjoying the food. And I was enjoying everybody's company, and it was lovely. I mean, yeah, people will think you're weird if you fast through some social events. Absolutely. And you don't have to tell people that you're fasting. Some people might ask, some people might not ask. But yeah, I mean, special occasions is what you make them, and special occasions don't have to equal eating.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that sounds like good advice. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility, but it's individual in terms of depending on what your plan is, and how far you have to go, and what your health needs are, and how much of an addict you are, and all these factors. You gotta kind of consider all the different factors. And I have done what you've said before. I like gone to a party and then just been fasting during the party, and they had a bunch of treats and stuff sitting around, and I just didn't eat them, but I enjoyed the social aspect of it. So I wouldn't say it's really that hard, because when you're like in the midst of a fast, sometimes it's just easy to keep going, because it just kind of puts you in that state where you kind of feel strong, and it's easy to keep going. On the other hand, it's hard to have a little bit and then stop. For sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I find stopping and starting so much more difficult.
Yeah. I've also been in that situation where I decided to, take a break from whatever because there was some special food related event or whatever. So it depends on the situation. And then I do think though that if you say eat low carb during a special event, 1 hour later, everybody's done eating, and you will feel like, oh, good, I stuck with my plan, I stuck with my goals, and you're going to feel better than if you just ate a bunch of junk. So that is worth considering, just kind of thinking about what's going to happen. So we have kind of limited time, maybe another 15 minutes or so. So I have some other things I want to ask you about, but we'll maybe have to do it a little bit rapid fire, or just give a kind of a summary, I guess, of the topic.
Sure.
Without going into too much depth in some cases. So I was just going to throw out real quick, when people start low carb and fasting, I know some people might be in a situation where they need some sort of medical supervision. So kind of what's the quick and dirty on what's your threshold for who maybe needs to be guided by a doctor as well at the same time, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to check with your medical provider if you have any worries about whether you're a suitable candidate for fasting. I think most people that are healthy will, in general, be a good candidate for fasting, and it will be perfectly safe for them to fast and be on a low carb way of eating. I think if you have any underlying health conditions, like if you have diabetes, if you have heart disease, if you have anything like that, of course, if you're on any medications, definitely check with your doctor first. It's important that you have that open conversation with your doctor, because you might need an adjustment to your dosage of your medication, or it might, depending on your condition, it might not be safe for you to fast, or it might only be safe for you to do some type of intermittent fasting, but not extended fasting. So definitely, if you have any underlying health conditions, or if you're on any medication, check with your doctor to make sure it's safe for you. If you're going to be doing a long extended fast, like some people do 30 days, some people, the longest ever recorded fast was over 300 days. And, he obviously had medical supervision through the whole thing. So if you are planning on doing a very long fast, definitely have medical supervision. Make sure you have your bloods taken.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I think the biggest thing, just to add a little bit more to that, the biggest thing is if you're on medications that affect your blood sugar, and secondarily your blood pressure, but the blood sugar is a bigger thing. So because you're probably gonna have to lower your doses and stuff if you cut out the carbs or start fasting or whatever. So now I know it sounds like from some stuff I looked at and whatnot that your book probably does address certain specific populations and their needs and things like that to some degree, at least with like the hormone component and things like that. But so let's run through a few and see if you have any kind of bullet points you can share. So what about if you're working with somebody, or if there's someone out there reading your book who is elderly, and so maybe you could argue a little more frail or what have you, maybe not able to tolerate as big of a shock to the system or whatever. And then other issues, like elderly people might need more protein or have a harder time maintaining muscle or whatever, which can sometimes be a challenge. So what's your general kind of summary of how you approach things with elderly people?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of listening to your body. So start slow, and if you're elderly, if you're frail, or like you say, you don't have a lot of experience with fasting, definitely start off slow. Start a 16-8, like I said, skip breakfast and see how that feels, and eat only lunch and dinner. And when you do eat, make sure you nourish your body properly. Have proper protein and carbs from healthy carb sources. So whenever we talk about keto diet, we always say no carbs, but that doesn't necessarily mean no carbs at all. It just means that no carbs from those traditional carb sources that we tend to call carbs, right? So no pasta, no bread, no rice, no sugar, all that stuff. But, you can have broccoli, which, broccoli is still a carb, but it's a very low carbohydrate vegetable, right? So with a ketogenic diet, you eat low carbohydrate vegetables. So anything that's green and anything that grows over ground, leafy green vegetables, that's what you can have on a ketogenic diet. So switch to a ketogenic diet. Try a shorter fast to see how you can tolerate it. And if you feel good, you can extend. Another important point to really emphasize, and I know you spoke about this before as well, is to take electrolytes. Always make sure that you replenish your electrolytes, sodium, potassium, magnesium every single day. I talk about that in my book as well, and I have guidance on how much you should have every day on a fast. That's just going to make sure that you feel as good as possible and that you stay as healthy as possible during your fast.
Okay, yeah, sounds like good advice in general, easing into things and whatnot. And there may be some other little things elderly people need to consider, but just taking it slow and not doing the most extreme version is probably a good general idea. And then just paying attention to your body and stuff like that, like you said. So thanks for those tips. Now, we may not have time to really address the topic as much as it needs to be addressed in a way, but when you talk about, I know you have some chapters in your book that mention things like hormones. Now, I haven't read the whole book, so I don't know if you're talking just about something like insulin, or if you're also talking about other types of hormones like estrogen or testosterone or whatever. But let's just throw out the idea of women after menopause or women after hysterectomy who have some hormonal changes that make it more challenging to keep body fat off and things like that. Do you have any specific recommendations, and did you get into that in your book as well?
So when I deal with my clients, a lot of them are postmenopausal. I work with mainly women, but I work with men as well. But a lot of women that come to me have struggle with weight gain postmenopause. And so I do deal with a lot of those types of women. And fasting has been revolutionary for all of them. Fasting really helps to regulate those hormones. I mean, insulin for sure, insulin resistance, and helps with that fat breakdown as well. It just helps to regulate and balance out your hormones. And I feel like it's been very beneficial to myself. My hormones certainly have balanced out. And, the clients that I work with women that have reversed insulin resistance, that have lost all the weight that they gained after menopause, after, some women have been completely fine and never struggle with their weight until they hit menopause. And then fasting and a ketogenic diet has been able to help with that. So for sure, it's very beneficial for your hormones. I mainly, in my book, Fast Yourself Fit, I talk about insulin resistance. I talk about the hunger and fullness hormones, ghrelin and leptin. And I talk about human growth hormone. But in terms of testosterone and estrogen, I don't get into that too much in my book, but it certainly is beneficial for women to fast. I know there's been some fear mongering around fasting for women, but in my personal experience and the experience that of working with hundreds and hundreds of women, fasting has been so life-changing and so beneficial. And I owe my health and my happiness to fasting. So I couldn't recommend it higher.
Okay, so broadly speaking, you find that for women who are going through menopause or after menopause or other hormonal challenges, that you find that the fasting is helpful to them, basically, is what I'm hearing, and that it tends to be helpful with some of the hormonal challenges that they're facing. So it seems like it's a pretty good fit, at least for a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. And I'm sure they can learn more by reading the book and whatnot. And it comes out on April 8th. I'm not sure if we're going to be releasing this before or after that date, but either way, April 8th, 2025, I guess, is when that is available, the book. And then I was going to ask, so real quick about fasting schedules. So I know you talked about starting with something like 16-8 and then maybe increasing the fasting duration, easing into something like OMAD, 1 meal a day. Now, from talking to other people and then from some observations on my own, I've seen that for some people who are trying to lose a lot of weight, lose a lot of body fat, they may run into an issue with OMAD where they kind of plateau, possibly because they're then doing kind of a repetitive thing day after day, where their body kind of adapts to it or whatever. So just based on your experience, have you found that to be the case at all? And what's your kind of approach when you talk about different fasting schedule options and or what to do if you're kind of hitting a plateau?
Yeah, so for me, my own personal experience, when I started off with OMAD, Keto OMAD. That's my baseline. That's one of my favorite schedules to follow. I think it's pretty easy relatively compared to the longer fasting schedules, and it's easier as well for social aspect, because I would time my OMAD, my 1 meal a day, at dinner, so I could have dinner with my friends or dinner with my husband, and so that worked out really well for me in that way, and I think it works out really well for a lot of people. Some people might struggle with not losing enough on OMAD. I mean, it was very effective for me, and it's very effective for most people, but maybe once you've done it for a few months, you might see that the weight loss slows as your body gets used to the schedule and things like that. So my recommendation then is just to switch it up. Most people, when they've done OMAD for a while, again, might find that it's pretty easy, or it gets easier. So you might find that you're tempted to try longer. And at that point, I say, go for it. If you want to try a rolling 48 schedule at that point, which means, you eat one meal every 48 hours instead of every 24 hours, that's an excellent way to switch it up. And you can try that once a week, or you can just try a rolling schedule where you just eat once every 48 hours for a couple of weeks. And that'll certainly get the weight moving again. Or you can go into trying an extended fast. So an extended fast is anything generally 3 days or longer. The longest fast I did was 18 days, but I've done several 4 days, 5 days, 7-day fasts, and so on. That is generally the most effective way to lose fat. the quickest, but it's also challenging. It has its own challenges, certainly, to go for that long without food. And you have to be very careful with how you refeed after a long fast like that. And you have to make sure that you keep your electrolytes really balanced through the whole thing. But yeah, switch it up if you feel like you're stalling. It's generally not considered a stall until you haven't lost any weight for 2 weeks approximately. So, stick with it. As long as the overall trend is down, you're doing something right. But if it's slower than you like, you might want to try a longer fasting schedule.
Yeah, right. So that part of what I'm hearing is, you got to pay attention to your individual needs and then change things up if needed. And that's kind of good advice in general. It's often good, I think, with fasting schedules to be changing it from time to time. So you're not just doing the same thing to your body constantly. So it has to kind of adapt to something new or whatever. And what was I going to say? Something about, so with OMAD, I know some people, myself included, maybe find that they don't think they're maybe getting quite enough protein or whatever sometimes in just the one meal. So maybe for somebody like that, it's better to do the 16-8 and then do an extra 24 hours once a week. Or, there's a million different ways you can approach it. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that since there are some challenges that come up with that. But let's see. So we're going to have to wrap up in a minute since we're running out of time here. But since you are from Sweden originally, I just thought I would ask, do you engage in any sort of, as another like kind of fat loss technique or whatever, do you engage in any sort of cold exposure intentionally, like the winter swimming kind of thing, or cold plunging or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm a really chilly person. I don't do well with cold at all. My husband is really big into cold exposure, though. He does the Wim Hof method and all that stuff. He hasn't quite convinced me to do it. I certainly have done some minor cold exposure by swimming in the ocean and stuff after sauna, but very, very rarely. And it's something that I'm open to getting into because I know the health benefits are so great, but it's not something that I'm that I really have done. I know I'm coming from Sweden. People always say like, oh, but you must love the cold. No, do not love the cold. I lived in LA for 2 years, and I think the LA winter is as cold as I want to get.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how it compares in each Scandinavian country. There was a lady from Denmark who was on Andrew Huberman's podcast who talked a lot. She does a lot of research about cold exposure, and she wrote a book called Winter Swimming. So I found that to be an interesting interview. But just thought I'd ask, since you're from the northern latitudes originally, but then you've spent some time in other places that have much warmer climates as well. So that's interesting. So I think you shared a lot of really useful info about fasting and low carb for weight loss. So appreciate you coming on and talking about all that stuff with us. And I know just from like looking at my outline, but also the table of contents of your book, there's a lot more info that people would need to kind of explore to really get a good handle on it. So one way, of course, is to check out your book, which again is called Fast Yourself Fit, or tell us the whole title of your book.
Yeah, so the book is called Fast Yourself Fit. It is available from April 8th. It's available from Amazon. It's available from Target, Barnes and Noble. It's available from Blackwell's as well, internationally. So any where you want to search the book, it's called Fast Yourself Fit, and it can be pre-ordered now. If you pre-order it, you also get 1 month of group coaching absolutely free with me if you do follow the pre-order link and send me a copy of your purchase receipt. So that's just like a little incentive for the pre-order, and the book will be officially published on April 8th.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I'm sure it'd be a good read. I haven't had time to read all of it, of course, because I just got a copy a couple days ago or something. But yeah, I'll look forward to checking it out, and I'll see if my library gets a copy of the audiobook, because I like audiobooks. I'll have to put in a request for that as well. So yeah, thanks again for all your time, all the tips and everything else. Is there anything else you wanted to mention about where people should find you or anything like that, or any parting tips?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, first of all. Yeah, if you do want to buy my book, it's called Fast Yourself Fit. If you want to check me out, I have a TikTok as well. I'm called Your Fasting Coach on TikTok, same on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I post a bunch of content there about how to fast safely, tips and tricks, all that stuff. So feel free to check out my different channels. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, we'll definitely include a couple links to some of the stuff that you mentioned. So yeah, thanks again for coming on. And I guess have a good rest of the evening since it's relatively late there in Liverpool.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.